Thank you.
Okay, so hi, welcome to Zahar Suleymanov's history group, and today we just want to sort of give you a basic introduction. This is a discussion among non-accredited individuals. Please take what we say with a grain of salt. It's just a friendly discussion among people who really care and are interested in history. My name is Richard Sassoon, and I'll be presenting with Sergio Martinez on Al-Andalus. So, in our previous discussion, we were talking about the Caliphate of Cordoba, right? Now, the Caliphate of Cordoba was established in 919 by the man in the center, Abdurrahman III. Now, Abdurrahman III was able to control a vast amount of territory, and it may seem that he was able to do so without a lot of difficulty, but that's actually not the case. If you look at what he assumed when he came to power, you can actually see that the Emirates of Cordoba, which he declared as the Caliphate, it was just a name change at that time. The Emirate of Cordoba, when he inherited power, was actually divided into numerous different feudal lords who controlled different areas of the territory. And 9 different ones were actually fighting for their own independence when he assumed the power. So even though the Caliphate of Cordoba controlled this large stretch of territory on paper, in reality, the Caliph sitting in Cordoba controlled the city-state, and all of the other city-states were vassals of his. If they saw an opportunity to expand their own power, they would revolt and try and create more power for themselves. This provided an entryway for some of the Christian kingdoms of the north to ally themselves with one Muslim city-state against another Muslim city-state or against the larger caliphate overall. You can see there, for example, in the bottom, in that sort of puce color, that sort of brown yellow, the territory of Omar ibn Hafsun. Omar ibn Hafsun. And Omar ibn Hafsun was an Amazigh. Amazigh is the proper term for a Berber, an indigenous person of northern Africa, right? So he was an Amazigh person, and he revolted to create more territory for himself. And in order to secure more support from the northern Christian kingdoms, he just converted to Christianity in the middle of running his kingdom. Now, after 4 years in power, Abdurrahman III was able to put him down finally, but otherwise, all of that territory was functionally independent and ruled by now a Christian king, building churches for that time. So you sort of see that there's this interplay between the caliph, who nominally has power over all these territories, and the local feudal lords, which have a much more concentrated effect on their power there. And as long as the caliph is able to express true power and control all these territories, then the caliphate stays united. Now, before we move on to the breakup of the caliphate, I want to talk a little bit about the internal dynamics of how the system works. So you have several different ethnicities at the same time. The first one is the Arabs. Now, the Arabs are maybe 3 to 5% of the population here. It's a very small group that is primarily in the leadership role, because the Umayyad leadership had a very strong pro-Arab bias. So these were people who had ancestors coming from the Middle East, and they generally would marry local Christians if they married locals at all, because local Christians didn't have a dynastic alliance. Now, after them, you have the Amazigh, the people from northern Africa. And now the Amazigh sort of divide between several different groups. First, you have the early Amazigh and the later Amazigh. The earlier Amazigh tend to be less religious and more connected to sort of the modern contemporary Spanish culture, because they've lived in Spain now for 200 to 300 years, versus the later Berber, the later Amazigh, who are coming from northern Africa at a different point in time. Then we have another distinction between Berbers that we'll see later, and that's between different types of Amazigh that live in Morocco still. You have the Masmouda, who live in the mountain ranges, and you have the Sanhaja, which live in the deserts. And the distinctions... Is somebody drawing on my PowerPoint?
Sorry about that. I don't quite understand what's happening. I keep getting a pop-up that says your thing, and now it's got a pen on it, and I can't get rid of it. I don't know if it's me or you.
Of ancient civilization.
Okay.
My apologies, Richard.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I'm trying to fix it.
Yeah, if you right-click, you might be able to open the menu that gets rid of it. So, okay, so you've got the Sanhaja and the Masmuda. These are two different Amazigh groups in Morocco. You also have the Muwallad population. Muwallad is both the Arabic and English term for them. The Spanish term is Muladi. And these refer to Iberians who have converted to Islam. So they're indigenous Iberians, and they make up the majority of the population. The second to them in terms of numbers are the Mozarabic Christians, which are Iberian Christians who now dress like Arabs and speak Arabic as their primary language, even though they're living in Spain. And so the Mozarabic Christians are just as Catholic in terms of their religious practice as the Christians in the north. However, because they're living under an Arabic ruling dynasty, they're dressed in that way and they're speaking the new language. And the last group are the Sakaliba. So the Sakaliba are, originally they were slave soldiers. They were enslaved Europeans, primarily Slavs, but it could also be French and Germans who had been brought to the Caliphate by Abdurrahman III in order to be a third party between all the disputes between the Arabs and the Amazigh in terms of who would have power and where. The Sakaliba, although they were slaves in the sense of they had no ability to choose their future, they had no access over their own lives, and they were bought and sold by wealthy individuals. They were soldiers, they were bureaucrats, they often wielded significantly more power over other people's lives than most free people, especially Mozarabic Christians and Muwallads, typically had.
Richard, one quick question. What was the language that everybody spoke?
Arabic. We already have slow development of the dialects of Arabic in Spain. And of course, there were versions of early Castilian that people were speaking. But the official language and the language that would be understood by everybody would have been Arabic. There are some Iberian differences that we can already detect based on the writings that we have that resemble very similar things to what we see, for example, in Maltese or in Moroccan Arabic versus what we see in the Middle East. But it was Arabic.
Hey, Richard?
Yeah.
Two quick questions. One, when we're looking at the map here and you're talking about these different ethnicities, is there a time frame, or like say we're talking about the 800s or 900s here?
Sure. This particular image is from the year 919.
Right. Okay. And then
when we're talking about all these different divisions in society, these divisions, with the exception of the Sakaliba, existed from the time that the Umayyads showed up in 714. Right? They invaded in 711, but they consolidated their position in 714 with the conquest of Toledo. So from that point on, you have all of these groups involved, except for the Sanhaja and Masmuda, who are going to stay in Morocco until a little bit later.
And I heard you say that, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you say that the Arab population during this period was 3% of the population.
About that, yeah.
That really reminds me of the British control of India when they had maybe 1%. Right.
No, it was very much a situation where the Iberian culture affected the Arabs in terms of the way that they ruled, in terms of the way that they valued their interactions, as opposed to it being exclusively some sort of domestic Arab recapitulation in Spain. There was definitely a relationship in terms of cultural exchange between the Arabs and the Spaniards that were living under them. And I use that word to refer just to people in Spain. There was no national consensus yet. There were a couple questions. One, did the Amazigh not bring their own language? No, the Amazigh did speak their own languages, However, Arabic was the dominant language of communication, and it was considered a higher prestige language. So that was number one. And number two, Amazigh from different portions of North Africa didn't speak mutually intelligible languages. They spoke different languages that could not be understood with each other. So if an Amazigh was with other people from his own region, then they could speak in perhaps in an Amazigh language. But you wouldn't know just by looking at another person first if they were Amazigh, because Amazigh have a wide variety of coloration. Some are darker than I am, some are lighter than I am. And Iberians have that same kind of variety of coloration as well. So you wouldn't know if the person you were speaking to was Muwallad or was Amazigh. And then further, you wouldn't know if that Amazigh came from the same region. So perhaps if he was Amazigh, but he came from the southern regions, then he wouldn't understand you. So they would use Arabic as well. And the other problem that we have with figuring out exactly how much Amazigh was spoken is that Amazigh did not have a written form until about the 1800s, 1900s, that was used consistently. Most people, when they wrote in Arabic. Even Spanish speakers, when they wrote, they would write with what's called al-Khamiado, which is Spanish, but using the Arabic alphabet. Yes. Zach points out that Mozarabe spoke Arabic, and Gothic people spoke Latin. And Hadrian, somebody asks, what about the famous Jewish scholars? There were Jews. They're nowhere near as significant of a population, a percentage as the other groups, which is why I don't mention them. It's the same reason I don't mention Roma. There were Roma in Islamic Spain, just not a large category of people. But we will discuss some of the Jewish scholars that show up in the later period in this presentation. Okay, so
John here, the Jews did play some kind of role politically.
Sure, they were primarily financiers. This isn't very surprising, but in some of the later periods, for example, you have the story of Samuel Hanagid, he was serving, I believe, Christians at the time. But anyway, no, sorry, he was serving the Nasrids in Granada. But
yeah, I think he was a vizier.
And he was given specific the specific ability to run the army, but that was a very specific and unique case. Generally speaking, Jews were restricted in terms of having banking roles, if they had any, in the official government.
I got a question to ask.
Sure.
If I may, or you want me to wait till later?
No, go ahead.
All right. According to history, most of the religions, this is what I heard, is that it came from the Torah, the Jewish.
Most religions came from the Torah?
Yeah, because it was only written language at that time.
That's not accurate. I'm sorry. At the time the Torah was written, even if we take the oldest Jewish estimates of the Torah being written, around 1000 BC or perhaps 1200 BC, right? Because Moses went up the mountain. Most historians, if they believe that the story happened, they'll put that around 1290. So let's say 1300 BC. We already have writing in Mesopotamia. We already have writing in China. We have writing in the Indus River Valley civilization. So that's not a claim that I think is historically verified. To say that Christianity and Islam certainly come out of Judaism, I think is very meritorious argument. And Christianity and Islam acknowledge their debt to Judaism and to the Torah in terms of the development of those religions.
There's other religions that have a taint, T-A-I-N-T, of Jewish either thought or teaching or whatever.
Sure, but I think it's actually quite clear from the way that Christology works that Christianity is a direct refutation of a number of key Jewish doctrines. So I don't see the through line of thought. I actually see a clear through line between Judaism and Islam. Yes.
You can see it in certain tribes in Africa where they made a document about 10 years ago. And also in Hinduism, there's a lot of different evidence that, like you said, a lot of it derived from.
I mean, we can definitely have this conversation some other time, but
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
I don't think that's accurate at all. I think Hinduism is very, very different from Judaism, and while there are some similarities, I think they're coincidental. I don't think that they're based on a common root. All right,
Jerome, let's keep
there are some other questions, such as the use of baths. Is baths baths in the Arab world was an heirloom they had gotten from the Romans. A lot of the territories that the Arabs conquered had baths, and the Arabs actually enjoyed that aspect of Roman culture. They saw the water as cleansing, as opposed to the Europeans, which had this idea that cleaning yourself actually made you more prone to getting disease. That dust covering your body was a protection against malady. So the Arab baths were a tradition that was brought over from the East, where it still remained in practice during the Eastern Roman Empire and had lost favor in the West. So let's see.
Rich, just continue with presentation and
sure.
pick up later. The
yeah. No, so okay.
Everybody, I'm sorry. I just want to mention quickly. Keep a question, 1 or 2 questions, please, and then Richard, in the end, we'll leave some time for more Q&A. I apologize. Thank you.
So
Olga, please mute your line. Thank you.
Okay, so this is with the fall in 1038 of Hisham III. He just died in his sleep. Basically, we see the split of the various Islamic states into what are called taifas. Taifa comes from the Arabic word meaning sect or partition. So on the left-hand side, you can see the taifas sort of separated by almost their alliances, right? The ones that are green sort of hold up against the Christian north. You have the ones in the southwest that are blue, that are sort of on that Atlantic coastline and sharing access to Seville. And you can sort of see how they're aligned politically. On the right-hand side, you can actually see how they are aligned ethnically. So you can see, for example, that for example, Badajoz and Valencia are both run by Sacaliba, identified on this map as Eslavos, right? Eslavos, Slavic people, because the Sacaliba were Slavs. At this point, the Sacaliba had revolted against whatever Arabs had taken power in their area, and effectively created their own governments, right? In the blue, you see those that are run by Amazigh. In the green, you see those that are run by Amazigh that have come more recently from North Africa, so they're less traditionally Spanish and more traditionally Amazigh. And the yellow, you see ones that are controlled by Arabs. And the grayish color are those that are controlled by Muwallad, Spanish-born Iberian Muslims, right? With minimal, if any, foreign heritage. So you can also see by comparing the two maps that the Christians have a decided advantage now, in that they have 4 or 5 different kingdoms, whereas the Islamic side is divided now into something on the order of 20 to 30 different kingdoms. Yeah. So now I want to talk about the situation that was occurring in the Taifa of Toledo. So one of the things that we have to realize is that we're having numerous different relationships developing between the Christian kings and the Muslim kings in the various different territories, right? So when the Umayyad Caliphate fell and Toledo became independent, Toledo was fighting against Castilla Leon, which was led by Fernando I, and Fernando I invaded in 1062. And as he moved further south, AL-MAMUN, who was the king of, the prince of Toledo, basically paid what was called a paria, which was an annual tribute to Fernando in order to avoid being conquered by Fernando I. In fact, in 1065, Mamun on Fernando's orders invaded the Taifa of Valencia. So, right, he was a Muslim tributary of a Christian king fighting another Muslim king in Valencia, and he was able to conquer Valencia, and he held Valencia actually until 1075. But the thing is that Fernando I died in 1065, and so when Fernando I of Castile died,
There's no toilet paper in here. Can I have some tissues? What?
so so Fernando I died, and so now Leon and Castile was divided, and so this Christian kingdom divided into three, into Galicia, Leon, and Castile. So now, of course, all those three partitions were fighting for each other. So Alfonso VI inherited Leon, but in 1071, Sancho II of Castile invaded Leon and forced Alfonso VI out. Al-MAMUN accepted Alfonso VI to come in as a refugee. And then when Sancho II was killed, Alfonso left Toledo to go back to Leon, right? So you have this sort of relationship where a Christian king is needing, I don't know the exact kind of succession that they had, but you have this situation where you have Christian kings, right, seeking assistance from Muslims against other Christians, and you had situations where Christians were paying Muslims to attack other Muslims. This was not a situation where the religious lines are what is the fundamental basis for the relationship. The relationships are based on individual kingdoms doing what they need to do to survive. Now, Al-MAMUN remained a strong ally of Alfonso VI when Alfonso VI came to power in Leon and reunited Castile and Leon together. Now, because Alfonso VI was able to reunite Castile and Leon, he then became the dominant partner in that relationship, and Al-Mahmud Al-Mamun of Toledo actually went on Alfonso VI's behalf and attacked Cordoba. Unfortunately, he died there after having conquered it. So the Taif of Seville was able to conquer that territory, and after a lot of giving and taking, a number of other caliphs were, a number of other princes from different regions were able to take over the area around Toledo, including Yahya al-Qadir II. So, as an ally of Mamun's, Alfonso VI entered Toledo and conquered it back and reinstated Al-Mamun as a vassal. Eventually, he would directly conquer the area in 1085, but because of this, you can see that there was a very strong interconnected relationship between all the different parties. And when Toledo finally became Christian in 1085, Alfonso VI accepted what was called the convivencia, the idea that Christians, Muslims, and Jews would all live together even if it was under Christian sovereignty. That there was not going to be a religious purge of the city. Now, that was not traditional in any part of Spain, this idea of religious purge. That would come later. But the actual expectation that this is the way it would run, and he was very clear about how it would run this way, was one of the gifts of this sort of multi-level relationship between all these different rulers. You can see on the left, this is actually azulejos, or Spanish tiles, from the Plaza de España in Seville. And this is Al-Mamun successors holding open their hats as a sign of surrender to Alfonso VI. And on the right, you can see the old city of Toledo. And of course, no story of Spain would be complete without the story of El Cid Campeador. You can see him on the right-hand side in a statue from the city of Burgos, where he was born. El Cid was also a very interesting figure in terms of how he was living in this world of different parties, right? We already know about Alfonso VI of Leon, And El Cid was one of his more trusted warriors for a while. And he fought on behalf of Alfonso in the conquest. In the conquest of Toledo. However, the king became increasingly suspicious of him. It became this sort of David and Saul situation, right? Alfonso VI is the king, but El Cid has this reputation. His name is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, but El Cid Campeador was his nickname. And El Cid was so popular and so loved that the king was afraid that perhaps El Cid would challenge him for power. And so El Cid fled to Saragossa, which was controlled by Muslim leaders. And he gave his services to the Muslim rulers in Saragossa. He fought both against the Christians in Aragon and against the Muslims in Lerida. So you have this sort of situation where he's leading Muslim armies as a Christian who was born in the Christian kingdoms and had previously fought in those Christian kingdoms against other Muslims, right? Then, after fighting for the Saragossans for a while, he managed to fight against, he fought in a number of Muslim coalitions against the Almoravids. We're going to talk about them in a little bit. But his final act of glory was that he went alone with his own group of Christians to liberate Valencia. And in 1094, he was able to conquer the city. And he established his own... Sorry,
quick question. So
Sure.
he had his own army? He had a
Yeah.
followers, or were they any important armies in all these towns, or?
Well, no, the thing is that, right, all the different princes would have different coalitions of people fighting for them. And so El Cid Campeador was just so famous, and his reputation was so great in all the battles he had fought, either for Alfonso VI or for the Saragossans, that there were a number of Christians that when he said, "I'm going to liberate Valencia," they said, "We're coming with you. We believe in you." You have to realize that his currency as sort of this caudillo kind of figure was enough to motivate them to fight with him. It was very similar to how in the last week that we spoke, we talked about Al-Mansur, in Arabic Al-Mansur, who was sort of this general under the Umayyads who had this caudillo effect as well, and was able to lead his own armies into battle and to affect his own politics, even though he wasn't the caliph. So in 1094, El Cid managed to liberate Valencia for the Christians and create a Christian kingdom that was besieged on all sides by the Almoravids, which was a hostile army. What ended up happening, though, is that he died in the city. And in 1099, his wife, Jimena Diaz, finally had to surrender the city to the Almoravids. Now, the thing is that Valencia would never become Christian controlled again until which we'll cover. So, one of the things that we're noticing, right, a lot of the taifas begin to fall. A lot of the territory begins to lost. We talk about Toledo, we talk about a lot of these taifas are attacking other taifas. We talked about how the taifa of Toledo attacked Valencia first and attacked after that. And so in Africa, there's a growing sense that the Spanish Muslim rulers are not going to be terribly effective. So we see a fundamental shift. We have to move our lens to Morocco for a little bit. You can see on the map on the right, the way to look at the map is the southernmost areas first, like those. That is where the Almoravid is from. The Almoravid is a corruption of the Arabic Arabitin, which means the binders. And the Almoravids were more conservative in their outlook, and they considered that one of the reasons why the Muslims were having issues was they were in Morocco at the time. They were tempering the version of Islam with all these sort of math and these other things we should care about being good, pious Muslims. So the Almoravids gathered other settlers, and they were led by a man named and he managed to, and after Father Marriage as their count, continued to war. And one of the things that he centered Maliki, Maliki in 4 schools, and he managed to make that. I think that in terms of what we care about in Spain, he led Sagrajas. The Battle of Sagrajas was a huge turning point in the wars between the Christians and Muslims. It brought all the Muslims on one side and all the Christians on the other side. The Almoravids made landfall and moved to and opposed the Christians. And the Christian kingdoms, Leon, Castile, and Aragon, going from west to east, united. So, and so in order to had fallen in 1085 to 6th, and it was very clear that there was that the counterattack. So started with and wing division. Divisions. He was able to battle with the 6th and encircle the troops. This to the Castilian troops panicking and starting to lose ground. That to a clear victory for the Almoravids. So all of the Taifas were the Almoravids, sort of as the privilege for saved territory. Now you can see that there was a huge disconnect between the Almoravids and the various Taifa and princes that they had replaced. The cultural difference and social difference. The Taifa kings are much more centered their culture than they were Amazigh, even if they were ethnically Amazigh. They were interested in sort of iffy lifestyle from the point of view of the Almoravids, and that was unacceptable. And sort of interplay with what in a sense to try and get their own power. At the same time, the Almoravids the mountains. So it's in the desert, the Masmuda live in the mountains. So you have an Amazigh by the name of Ijmat, goes to Baghdad and studies and comes back. When he comes back, he sees that the Almoravids, as they are still not pious enough. They're using anti representations. They're sort of being in Spanish culture, and so Ibn Tumart, basically it would be like according to the Messiah that he's Christ back to life. The Mahdi is a slightly different, but it's based on the same eschatological meaning in Islam. It was poorer than Spain. It just happened that you had larger populations that were born. And so Ibn Tumart founded this movement, and he was the Mahdi. He was killed by the Almoravids, but his followers, in his name, took power and were able to completely destroy the dynasty and take over almost all their territory. Now, I wanted to sort of explain a little bit about the four pictures. The picture on the left is pretty self-explanatory. That is a picture of the Almohad Empire at its largest. Almohad comes from the Arabic al-Muwahhidin, meaning unifiers, because they believed that they were the unity and belief of only one God and no anthropomorphisms. The second picture is of the Citadel. The control is more recent, was built after the Cruise territory. The clock tower is actually built by them. It has 2 sisters in Morocco, one in Rabat. The Citadel tower was built by, but before then it was attached to the main mosque, which was demolished to make way for the church. In the middle is a Qabilia family, which are mountainous Berbers from Algeria. And they looked very similar to the kind of Masmuda that Ibn Tumart and his followers were. The mountain people, they would typically be stored in those urns would either be olive oil, and yeah, so that's they're holding the urns. Yeah, and on the right hand side you see the same belief of the Almohads were Taliban of their time in terms of firmly believed. For example, was that in Marrakesh was the capital of the Almoravids. The Almoravids built a large mosque, and the Almohads completely destroyed it because, according to them, it was not the proper rank. It was off by 5 degrees of the circle. They had to destroy the entire mosque and rebuild it. Of course, well, there's a huge debate in Islamic circles as to exactly how you get a mosque to face Mecca. But less correct facing Mecca. But the idea of you have to do a mosque completely in order to because it's not facing the proper direction shows you how strict they were in their faith. Another distinction between the Almohads and the Almohads, because the Almohads respect minorities. There was persecution of Jews all throughout Morocco, and there was persecution of Spain as a result of the Almohads taking power there. We also saw a large number of Christians either fleeing to the north or leaving because the situation was so dire. You also see a number of Muslims seeking to move to control areas like Vivencia, like Toledo, this is because they did not want to practice Islam as strictly as the Almohad did. about two leaders who exist in Pakistan. Maimonides is born in the south, right? The part that was that's why he fled to and he became the chief physician of the Fatimid Caliph, who lived there. And the Fatimids were Muslims, which means they are Shia, but not the same kinds of Shia that we on today. Ismaili is a minority, and there's no majority Ismaili state in the world. But while he was living in Fatimid Egypt, he wrote many of the books and performed many of the studies that would lead to him being considered among the leaders of the Trinity today. He wrote a number of books on Jewish law called Halakha, right, Jewish law, and wrote Moreh Nevuim, that was sort of designed to theology.
So, Richard, who was in Egypt at the time? Which yeah, what kind of sect was that? Thank you.
Yeah, Fatimid is the name of the ethnic group, it's the name of the dynasty, and Ismaili is a sect within Islam. There are three main Shiite sects. Yeah, Seveners and Ismailis are the same thing. So you have Seveners are Ismailis, and you have Twelvers. Turkey is also
Richard, believe that some Muslims were not deciding to follow very strict Islam, went to Christian kingdoms.
Yes.
Were they accepted there as Muslims?
Yes. There was a convivencia. The Muslims were there. They accepted the sovereign. They were generally happy about that situation. So, and there was a very good use for them. They could serve to translate documents or whatever those were. There was some Christian antagonism towards evangelism, but was now one thing that with Maimonides is I also wrote what was called and Jews refer to it today the after the first word in the creed, but he wrote a 13-point Jewish creed to match the Nicene Creed, basically to say Jews were. This was immensely controversial in Jewish circles because Jews functioned along Congregationalist lines, and so Jews found it immensely upsetting to have this idea that somebody could tell other Jews what Jewish from a religious perspective. So there were a number of people, especially in Jews in the Christian, who considered this cause what Jews should believe. I have a question here of asking: did the Muslims raid the northern kingdoms of the coast of slaves? Yes, to the coast of Europe. No, to the northern kingdoms. This wasn't raiding them. The position was very helpful. That line had been made and held for about 100 years. So crossing it was sort of very cool. On the right, we have Nachmanides. Nachmanides grew up in the city of Girona in the Cal, or Jewish ghetto. The of Girona, actually, in the center, it's distinguished by having 15 streets relative to Girona, simply because since I couldn't be sent group to the buildings bigger and the streets smaller.
I just remembered, wasn't the Maimonides also a physician?
He was, yes. I
think that's a big part. I mean, he was there until Saladin.
He tore.
Yeah.
So, so you see Nachmanides. He was living in Girona, which was Christian, right? So the Catalonia, and he tried to make peace between Maimonides and the European leaders, saying that you shouldn't accept his creed, his God, but his rulings on halakha are decent ones. Now, himself famously wrote the Kodesh, which was a book on a number of Jewish themes, such as marriageness and sexual relations. Basically, his attempt to contribute was how marriage work. He also wrote a number of books on birth and death and other issues. He wrote a book on the Torah, which is probably his most famous work, and he finds. And he was a French rabbi lived about 2 centuries earlier, who also wrote a commentary on the Torah, and the two of them compare and contrast different opinions. In the Christian world, Nachmanides words the Prince of Catalonia wanted to prove Christianity was the correct religion, and so he had Nachmanides the Jewish community, and he had who was a former Jew, represents the Christian world, and they had this debate. It was a very controversial thing. In Catalonia, the Jewish community kept being attacked as sort of not conceding that Christianity was the religion. Eventually, Nachmanides had to bow out of the dispute. Quit for the army community. One of the things that's being asked is whether or not they had papyrus or leather books. They had bound books. By this time, they had already gotten paper from China, and paper was quite common in the Islamic world by this point. They also had glue binding. That was a discovery that was 150 years old. And in terms of who would buy or copy books, literate people, and there were actually large centers of bookmaking in Baghdad, Baghdad, Cairo, and in Toledo.
Regarding the papyrus, and why wouldn't the Europeans have then imported, or maybe they did eventually, that paper technology from Muslim Spain or somewhere else in the Islamic world?
Well, what were they using in Europe?
I don't know.
I was about paper.
Okay.
I didn't read fully opposed to books.
I think that Europe, through the Muslim world, particularly through Spain and through Italy, through Sicily and southern Spain, the 1200s. And before that, they were using parchment, but parchment was fairly rare and expensive, and parchment was not suitable for printing. Paper was much better for printing, and around the time they started developing paper, they also started block printing, well before Gutenberg introduced movable type.
What's specifically, what's the difference between paper and parchment?
Parchment is made from the skin of a deer.
Skin.
Ah, that stuff. Okay, yeah, or pig or something like that. Yeah.
I think sheep may have been the more common. Sheep and goats were the most common source of parchment, as I understand it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now we're going to move into the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. So as you can see from this map, in the intervening years, even as the Almohads took power, the Christian kingdoms were able to expand further south. You can also see that Castile seems to take the lion's share of that expansion, sort of moving into the center territory and almost making its way to the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which you can see by the Taifa of Baeza. Right, because not all the Taifas were under the Almohads. Some of them were able to break free with help from the Christians. Right, in the middle you have Pope Innocent III, and Pope Innocent III had decreed many crusades, and he now considered the retaking of Spain from the Muslims as a crusade, and was able to issue holy writs and indulgences for those soldiers who would fight in the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. On the left-hand side, I wanted to show the story of the breaking of the chains. On the Spanish flag, from the medieval period until now, there are 4 emblems that are representative of the different regions of Spain. There's a lion that represents León, because the Spanish word León means lion. There's a castle for Castile, because the Spanish word Castilla means castle. Those 2 are pretty self-explanatory. Catalonia and Aragon, we're going to see the Aragonese bars coming up. But Navarre is represented by the chains, and this is the interesting story of where the chains come from. It's actually from this battle in Las Navas de Tolosa. You can see the chains actually in the middle of the picture. And the reason for it was, in the battle, the Almohad forces and the Christian forces were locked pretty much in a dead stalemate until King Sancho until King Sancho of Navarre went around the main Muslim position and came to the back. At the back, protecting the leader of the Almohads, were a number of black slaves who were chained to each other, or at least that's how the legend goes. And Sancho, in order to attack the king, broke the chains holding these black slaves together. They all ran because now they were free. Their chains were broken, and the Almohad leader was put to flight. This led to his troops breaking rank, and the Christians won a decisive victory that day. So that's the symbol of the chains of Navarra, in the sense that because Navarre broke those chains, it was actually able to unify Spain, which is the secondary meaning of the chains, right? It's the country is being held together.
Yes, Richard, quick question.
Sure.
I know you know this. I remember back in the days you presented this. Can you give it maybe 1 minute synopsis of how the slaves from Sub-Sahara got into the Arab world, just for a second? It's an interesting aspect of it.
Sure. One of the main things is that in addition to what we know of as the transatlantic slave trade, far earlier there was the trans-Saharan slave trade. So you had individuals from the Arab world coming to sub-Saharan Africa and providing all kinds of monetary gifts and salt in exchange for slaves. And so those slaves were brought up through the desert to the massive slave markets in Tunis and Cairo, and I believe in Fez. I'm trying to remember where the Moroccan slave market was. From there, they would be sold further north into Spain. The trans-Saharan slave trade route was far more dangerous than the transatlantic slave trade route because of dehydration in the desert, attacks by bandits, and numerous other things. So we have the expectation, at least that's confirmed in our research, that roughly 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 of those slaves who crossed the Atlantic died en route, be it from disease or suffocation or some other issue in the transportation. Our research suggests, and it's much fuzzier because of how bad the records are on this, but our research suggests that it's almost the opposite crossing the Sahara, that roughly 8 in 10 did not make it. Despite that, we still have large numbers of African slaves moving into the Arab world, such that even in the early 800s, we have Iraqi cotton plantations with large-scale black slave involvement. Most of these slaves, though, coming from Zanzibar, which is actually where that island got its name. Zanzibar was the Persian word for Black People Island. And the slaves that came from there were called Zenj. One of the interesting things is that because Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, and because numerous Christians had come from France, Germany, and Italy as a result of the Virgin Mary sighting at Santiago de Compostela and the pilgrimage to Santiago, you had large numbers of foreign Christians also fighting in Las Navas de Tolosa under the Leonese and Castilian flags. And now Sergio is going to talk a little bit about the arms and armament that are in that period.
Okay, cool. Can you guys see me?
Yeah, you look fantastic.
All right. Great to be here. All right, so I could be a variety of things. I could be either Arab, I could be Berber, I could be Almoravid, I could also be Almohad. I could be 11th century or 13th century. So a lot of overlapping going on in this period. So I'm just going to discuss.
Sergio, I'm sorry. Can you come closer a little bit? Just a little bit. Yeah.
Well, all right. Sorry.
Sorry.
So
and then maybe turn the iPad so you can see the whole screen. It's just only a small portion of you.
Landscape, not portrait.
Yeah.
How's that?
Perfect. Yeah. Now you can go a little bit further apart. Yeah. Yeah, much better.
Really clean. You can see Sergio, so you see him.
Perfect.
Is this good? Because
yes.
I can't see myself. Okay.
Yes, perfect.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to discuss about the equipment, the attire, on both on the Muslim front and the Christian side. So I'll begin. Obviously, I'm dressed as a Muslim warrior. What I'm wearing underneath everything is a padded, quilted coat. All right. It's made of many layers of linen, and it's actually a form of armor. It's not the armor that we think of, but it has plate armor with chainmail. It's just a protective layer that for a poor soldier would have, because these soldiers, these armors, they wouldn't necessarily, they would either be, some would be slaves, some would be mercenaries, in which they'd have to provide their own armor and their own equipment. So depending on their class or their level, they would have to, use what they could afford. So this is a very basic armor, and a lot of the Berbers and Arabs would wear this, especially in the early waves when they came in the 8th century. Or in addition to this, they would have a chainmail shirt that goes on top of it. Chainmail, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a shirt made of lots of layers of rings, tens of thousands of rings that make up a garment, and you would wear that on top of the gambeson, if you will. It offers a lot of protection. Now, on my torso, I have a type of armor known as lamellar. And what lamellar is basically little pieces of plate metal that are all stitched together to make a breastplate, if you will. Now, normally they're made of steel or iron. Sometimes they're even made of leather, and there's some sources that they've been made of tusk, or I should say ivory better. Now, lamella goes way back to the Assyrian time, perhaps even earlier than that. There are some sources the Romans use lamella. They called it lorica squamata, and what squamata means is fish scales. If you can see, it does look like fish scales in a way. However, different than actual fish is that the scales go upward instead of downward. And the reason for this is that if I get attacked with a blade weapon, it's gonna stop because the blades are going upwards.
Sergio,
move back a little bit. So
we're seeing mostly your head. We need to see your chest.
Is this good? Is this good?
No, no.
Hold on, guys. Wait. Let him talk. Go ahead, Sergio.
No, but can you see me though?
Well,
No.
hold on. You gotta say something.
We can only see your head.
Your head.
Everybody mute their lines, please. Let Sergio talk for a second. Thank you.
All right. Are you getting a good view?
No, you gotta take the iPad or whatever you have and bring it so you can see the bottom piece. A little bit lower. Right there. Perfect.
Vertically, that's it.
That's good?
Yeah.
Yeah, leave it alone. Yeah.
Because I can't see myself because of that. All right. So what I was going to say, what I was saying is that the reason the plates go upward instead of downward is that if I get attacked with the bladed weapon, it's going to stop. You see, it doesn't slide down. But if the plates were downward, it would slide. And it could then go into another part of my body that's not protected. So it was kind of like a protected layer to keep these plates upward. And it's a very practical and very comfortable form of armor. Oh, that's much better. Exactly. Leave it like that, please. And then you could, but this armor wasn't used by everybody. This is only somebody of a higher status that could afford this because it's very expensive to make. And I only have the front piece. You see, I'm not protecting my back, but they would have the front and the back and the shoulders as well. Yeah, that was a very important piece of armor. Now they had shields. They had two types of shields. They had all metal type of shields, and they also had a all leather shield called the adarga. And this is all leather, okay? And they had these shapes, kind of had like a heart shape. Now, this is a very effective shield. And normally it would have been made of antelope or hippopotamus hide if it came from North Africa. And it's very lightweight, but it's also very strong. This is a very simple one I made, but it would have much thicker one, maybe half an inch even, that can actually deflect arrows and stuff like that. And the good thing about this type of shield is that it bends. So if for example, the cavalry, you could actually go on the horse and it would bend. It wouldn't cause discomfort for the rider or the horse. And this Muslim type of shield was used not just by the Muslims, but the Christians as well. So far, all the way up into the New World, there's a codex with Cortez where you'll see a shape. If you ever see a shape like this with conquistadors, shape like this, that's an adarga, which is an all leather shield.
Quick question: what are the tassels for on that shield?
Oh yeah, simply decoration. That's all they are. There's just Arabs have a very distinctive look, and even when the Christians adapt the shield, they still keep the tassels. The tassels do not do anything other than decor.
I thought if you want to use it as a bra.
You can do that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
All right, Sergio, one more question. So, what about horses? What were they wearing?
I'm gonna get to the cavalry in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just gonna finish this and that's it. What was I gonna say? Okay, so a typical weapon was this lance or the spear. Okay, that's a very practical weapon all throughout Europe. It's a simple weapon to make. All you need to get a spearhead made of iron, a tall pole or staff, and pretty much anybody can learn how to use it a lot more easier than other weapons such as a sword or scimitar, stuff like that. So they have their weapon, their shield, and their spear, and so forth. Now we're not sure exactly how they advance. There was some source they might have fought in a phalanx, but I don't think so. Some believe that they might have rushed the enemy full force. We do know what the cavalry fought, and I'll discuss that in a minute. But anyhow, yeah, it's probably again, this is just my opinion. I think it's a combination of two, because we do know that they were very mathematical, and they had a lot of the Greek works left behind, such as Herodotus and stuff like that. So again, this is just my guess that they might have used some of the tactics that the Greeks used. But again, that's lost in history. We don't know, but we know they were very fierce in battle. So one of the things that are different between the Almoravids and the Almohads, the Almoravids would actually cover their faces in battle. Okay, that was just a very common thing. See, again, not sure why some believe, because they thought the mouth was dirty,
I think it's also because the Almoravids were originally Sanhaja, which means that they lived in the desert, and so that would just be typical, fear of sandstorms. Whereas the Almohads were from the mountains, and that's less of an issue.
Okay, good. Thanks for clearing that up. Okay, great. So I'm now going to quickly transform into a Christian nobleman from the north. Now, normally these armors are hard to put on and put off. But again, if you were someone of high status and you could afford this armor, you could afford someone to be your assistant or your squire. So the Christian northern, again, these are typical soldiers, and they would have.
Sergio, before you get to Christian, there's a question came in.
Yeah.
Was there any helmets or shields that to protect lower section?
No. For the lower part of the body, as far as shins and leg guards, not really. If they had mail armor, they would use the mail armor, but no. But yes, they did have helmets, and the helmets looked a lot like the conical helmets that you would see in the 10th, 11th century. Think of William the Conqueror, kind of something like that. But again, yeah, they did have helmets, and sometimes they wore them underneath the turbans. So underneath the turbans. Now, again, this is a lower class soldier known as the Almogavare, and they would have the same padded protection, layers of linen, okay? Because that's what they could afford. Most likely they would have made it themselves, or their wives or their grandmas. And the same goes for their head. They would have, this is called a coif, and this is how a lot of them would go into battle. Not much protection, but it's some protection. It's comfortable. I can't hear as well, but anyhow, it's something they use, and they were very effective in. Now, if they were able to afford some mail armor, they would put it over the coif. And this would be a more effective setup. So now I have two layers of protection. I got the mail, and then I got the padding coif underneath it, which is pretty effective. They too would have a long spear or lance, okay? And they'd have a short sword, a very short sword. Swords were expensive in those days, and even more, you have to learn how to use a sword. So this is more like a short sword, last resort type of weapon. And of course, a simple shield. And that's kind of how it is. So I can tell you this much: this thing, although you're comfortable and it's somewhat protective, it is really hot on these things. So in the weather in Spain, and usually they fought during the summer months, these guys were really like a baked potato in these things. No question. So now let me go to the slides.
Well, Sergio, once you go through slides, no, the Muslim world or Arab world was known for their iron work. I mean, they were, there used to be inscriptions there on it, and it was an unbelievable, quality of work. Did Christians emulate any of that stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, the iron in Spain was very rich as well, and so, yeah, I mean, one of the many reasons they wanted to be in Spain because of the the climate, the resources, stuff like that. But yeah, they actually made use of the ironworks, and as we'll see later, they even adapted some of their technology, such as the shield, some of their weapons, and their cavalry details as well. So absolutely. Okay, so now let's go to the Almogavares. Again, these are the lower class soldiers who didn't have a lot of armor or a lot of protection. However, they had strength in numbers. As you can see on the left part, that's a manuscript from the 13th century of these soldiers. And you can see that a lot of them don't have a lot of heavy protection. They have that padded coif. No, I don't believe they had trebuchets at this point in time. They were trebuchets existent. I think, Ralph, you probably know more than that than me, but I don't, as far as I know, they were no trebuchets in Andalus. Okay, so going back to the soldiers, one of them on the far left, you can see he's got a helmet. With the little crescent moon, he's got a helmet on. So some had helmets, some they didn't, and so on, so on, so on. And it looks like they're fighting in the phalanx style. So I'm convinced that they are. The picture to the left is obviously a modern drawing. And as you can see, he has They have long spears, maybe 30 feet long, with small little spear tips and a short sword, and that's basically it. Not too much body armor or helmets or anything like that. Now the Almohades, they have a little bit of history. They were actually mountain men or farmers. They're going way back during, even before the conquest of the Muslim. They were pretty much like they would conduct raiders. They would attack villages with their weapons, just raid and leave. That's kind of like what their backstory. Some believe that they were even Muslim or Christian and perhaps even pagan. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that's kind of where they came from. They were just farmers or mountain men that would just attack villages that had a lot more to offer than they had. Eventually, they'll become into the court of these Spanish houses of Catalan and Aragon and so forth, and then they become paid mercenaries and so forth. So yeah, so let's go to the next slide. We'll talk more about knights. Okay, so the knights, or the caballeros in Spanish, they obviously were of nobility, so they could afford to have much better armor, much better equipment, and so forth. And they would be pretty much covered, dressed head to toe with the armor of its day, which is the chainmail. As you can see, that they have it. The leg part is they're not like pants; they're more like leggings, so they're held together by a rope or a belt. The top part, as you can see in an illustration, he has a whole full coat full of chainmail, which is pretty heavy. It's not something that you can just put on easily. You'd have to be trained to do this. And as well as they have the coif, they have the padded headgear underneath that will go underneath the chainmail hood. They even had mail all the way up to their mittens. So these men were really, really heavy in battle. Was the fighting seasonal, or all throughout, fighting was always done in the summer months, not just because of the weather, but just because to feed an army, it's not something that is a small event. So they have to be prepared, and usually the summer months is when battles took place all throughout, and of course the land has to be dry and secure so that the horses can ride on and so forth like that. To the right of that is another an artwork of a famous battle called the Conquest of Mallorca, Reconquista of Mallorca, which was a campaign led by James I of Aragon, in which they recaptured the island of Mallorca, which is an island, I believe, northeast from Spain, which was ruled by the Muslims, and up until the Almohads, when it was captured by a whole coalition of Spanish houses. I think Catalan, Aragon, I think the Templars, Hospitals, a huge coalition of Christian houses when we captured it. And as you can see, they're covered in mail armor. Now, one thing with the knights is different from other parts in Europe, as opposed to in Iberia, is that they wear their heraldry on their sleeves, not so much in their surcoats. We usually used to see that they have, for example, a tunic with the crest of their family or their shapes or their colors. But in Iberia, in Spain, they're wearing it on their sleeves, as you can see. Those dots, that is, I believe, the Count de Moncada, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, he wears it on the helmet, he wears it on his sleeves, and in their shields. That's something unique. We don't see that too often in other parts of Europe, such as France and England and Germany. So that's how the knights pretty much will dress up in battle. And knights, we all know, are soldiers that fight in battle in a horse. That's what makes a horse. Not just because you had a horse or you had the armor doesn't make you a knight. However, if you did have, you were a knight, you definitely had a horse, and you definitely had the armor. In fact, the word caballero means horseman, from the word caballo in Spanish, as well as French and in German have words that are similar to that. They either refer to someone riding a horse or a horseman in some sense.
Well, Sergio, you have to supply your own supply if you're a horseman, if you're a knight.
Knight, yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're a person of wealth to begin with, so you could afford to invest in this type of equipment and arms and armor. And of course, you're at the service of the king or the lords, to which you can be granted land or a tax incentive or something like that. So yes, absolutely. These were people that are definitely a lot more well off than the Almohades and so forth like that. Another type of soldier that we would see in this period would be the crossbowman. Now, crossbows, there's a lot of debate as to where the crossbow came from. Some believe the Muslims brought it. The Chinese were the first ones to create the crossbow, going back to ancient times. However, so did the Greeks. The Greeks had these long crossbows called the gastritis, and you'd use your whole body to pull back the bow. So that might have survived since the fall of Rome. And of course, we know the Romans had this big ballista type of artillery weapon. But then again, Muslims did also acquire a lot of weapons from the Chinese. So it's debatable who brought the crossbow to Europe. But definitely the Christians were using a lot of that type of weaponry. In fact, Castile had one of the best crossbowmen in that time in 12th century, 13th century Spain. So yeah, let's go to the next one. Do we have questions? Sorry if I'm not missing some. Some reference. Okay.
Yeah, I'll answer the scale of the battle question.
Okay.
If you look at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, you have a rough strength of 13,000 on the Christian side and about 25,000 on the Muslim side. So it's not 3,000 versus 3,000. It's about 4 times as large as that.
Okay, yeah, awesome. All right, so now let's talk about the cavalry. Now, one of the most important breakthroughs, inventions that came around that I feel a lot of people don't realize or gets very overlooked is the stirrups. The stirrups on a horse is so important. Again, that's another thing that's debatable as to who invented it. Now, the domestication of the horse goes back 1,000 years. The first stirrups show up in India around the 2nd century BC. So that's a lot of time before people realized that putting these little metal hooves between a horse's saddle is so effective. I mean, without the stirrups, you're just pretty much riding the horse just to stay on. But once you have the stirrups and you're riding it, you become part of that animal. And if anybody's rode a horse, it would be so hard to ride it, especially in battle with the stirrups. So stirrups are a very, very important part of the cavalry and all throughout history when it comes to horse riding and stuff like that. And those pictures right there is a picture of, they're actually Spanish stirrups, but you can see there's a lot of Moorish influence. They got a little bit of the geometric and little shapes on there. It's very pretty. It's actually from the Met. And below that is another manuscript, which again, I'm not sure if they're Almohads or Almoravids, but they're definitely Muslim, and it's a cavalry. And there you can see on the bottom right, in the bottom, the one with the pink, he's got the stirrups there. So you can see the stirrups are a very important part of the cavalry. Now, the way they fought in the cavalry, they would just charge full force. They were not heavily armored at all. Okay. Now, unlike knights, where, you know, if someone was on horseback, they'd be heavily armored because that was a prestigious thing. Whereas the Arabs, not so much. They were light infantry cavalry, and they would attack full force and then retreat and backwards. And they were very effective at doing this. So much that the Spanish, the Christian knights will eventually adapt this, and they were called jinetes. Jinetes will survive all the way through the Reconquista into the New World. They were very effective, and yeah, they even rode a certain way. They rode kind of standing up but crouched down, so they were kind of suspended, and that would give them more speed to attack the enemy. So the Muslim cavalry was very effective, and again, obviously the Spanish would adapt from this. Now, another thing that's important in medieval history in general is the banners, the heraldry. That's obviously, these heraldry are just symbols of people's houses or the kings that they're fighting for and so forth. They have these symbols and colors and charges and so forth like that. Muslims had something similar like that, but they weren't so much for a specific house, but a specific dynasty. Correct me if I'm wrong, Richard. They weren't specifically fighting for a specific emirate. They weren't a specific TAIFA. They had it was kind of a broad
the Almohads assembled the Universal Coalition. There were some taifas that did not fight under the Almohad banner, but those didn't fight at all. They stayed out of the battle.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So banners in general were very important. And you think about it, the banner bearer, if you want to call him that, had a very important role, and at the same time a dangerous role, because when you're holding a banner, we're talking about a pole that's maybe 30 feet tall, you have to hold it in one hand, while in the other hand you're holding a horse. You're controlling a horse. So you don't really have much of an opportunity to protect yourself or fight in battle. But these men were very much in battle alongside their fellow knights and mercenaries and so forth. So these banner bearers were very important, and nobody wants to see their banner full. Okay, because that's the sign of your strength. That's the sign that you're competing in battle and that you have not been defeated. So that's a very important thing to consider. And not only that, they were open targets. They certainly definitely want to attack the banner bearers, because that they were open, that you could spot them easy on the field, and B, you know that they're not well protected. So the cavalry would try to protect these men, we believe, because these men were obviously not able to protect themselves, but they also had other roles, okay, that would obviously benefit them. I know that the Romans, for example, some of the standard bearers had other positions, such as they were in charge of the payroll or in the pension of other soldiers. So it was a very important. You didn't want this guy to die on the battlefield. Next thing you know, you might not get paid next week. So something to that effect. We want to believe that these banner bearers were very important. They were very prestigious, and it was an honor to have these things in the field.
Sergio?
Yeah.
I think one of the functions of the standard bearer is to show where the heart, the central element of the troops are. When people are in battle, often it's just total chaos. And if they need sometimes to look around, and if they're being surrounded by others, they need to look around and know where they can get back to their fellow soldiers on their side. So you keep an eye on where the standard is. You want to fight, but you also want to keep in line with your own soldiers. You don't want to get too far away and isolated. And if you do, in the midst of battle, you need to know where to get back to your own soldiers. And that's what the standard bearer signals that. That's where your forces are.
You're absolutely correct, Ralph. Thank you for bringing that. They were pretty much markers. Yes, that was the main focus of the the standard bearers in all battles and so forth. Yeah, heraldry in general it was very important in those days. To the right is a picture of another part of the Conquista de Mallorca, and that's a well-known lord in Catalan called Guillem Ramon de Moncada. And he actually dies in this battle, and you can see his coat of arms has a lot of colors to it, dots, shapes, and so forth like that. The little picture on the top, the Islamic banner, that is an Almohad banner. And as you can see, they have a Star of David. Now, the Muslims, they actually revered King Solomon and David as a warrior. So even though it's a Jewish symbol, it's a Muslim banner, which I think
I was going to say, they don't use it the same way the Jews do.
No, yeah, it's not. It's more out of, I think, respect or something like that. Yeah, it's not religious as far as I could think of. So yeah, that's overall what they used, and that's kind of like, and even heraldry today survives if we think about it. You know, the soccer teams like Chelsea and Barcelona, they still have those symbolic lions from the English house and Spanish houses like that. So I think it's interesting that a lot of this history still survives in us today. And yeah, anybody has questions, let me know.
All right, so I guess I'll take it back a little bit. So once, oh, it went black, surprise. So, okay, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so after the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, the Almohads were put on the defensive, and the Castilians were able to expand their power base. One of the key events that ended up leading to that being successful was that one of the issues, one of the benefits that
in the 10th century, 913 by they would rule like castle fortifications for the Almohads and so forth. And obviously it's Christian now, but once the Reconquista occurred, they would reconstruct some of the interior part, but they would definitely commission some of the Muslim architects of the day that were still around to style and the art of the work and so forth. So and then inside you see something else. Yeah, you can see the arches there, really beautiful. These are horseshoe style arches, and it has a lot of geometric patterns, lot of detail, a lot of, you know, artwork that's really impressive and stuff like that. As well as the gardens. The gardens are also really, really lavish. They have obviously the palm trees, they have orange trees, the bushes are cut in a geometric shape. It's something that obviously requires a lot of maintenance and upkeep and stuff like that. And the Christians obviously love this style of architecture and artwork, and they would continue to live like this all the way up to the end. And it still looks like this to this very day. In fact, if anybody is a Game of Thrones fans here, this is where they shot the scene of Dorne, where it's supposed to be Al-Andalus in these very specific gardens of Seville. Yeah, that's that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, very nice, Sergio. Thanks. So you can see here, this is the unification of Aragon. One of the differences that we see between the way Castile came together and the way that Aragon came together is that Castile came together by conquering various regions and annexing them directly. So Castile remained a unified monarchy. The situation in Aragon is completely different. You can see on the map, there are several different colors, and I'm going to explain what you're looking at. So on the left-hand side, you can see that it's sort of bluish, tealish colors. Those were the original territories of the Kingdom of Aragon, which controlled this sort of central west relative to the rest of Aragon, but east relative to the rest of Spain regions. Then you have these sort of red areas, which are the counties of Barcelona and Catalonia, sorry. And then you have the orange areas, which are the territories of Valencia. So what ended up happening is that the counties of Catalonia were ruled by the Berenguers, and Aragon was ruled by Ramiro I and his successive family. So what ended up uniting them was what was called a Union of the Crowns. So Ramon Berenguer IV of the Catalan counties married, he married, why am I not seeing this? A Petronia of Aragon. And Petronia was the descendant who was, she was the queen of the country. So now this was a marriage of families under one union, which led to their consolidating power. However, because it was a union of families and not a union of governments, there were actually two separate governments under this one monarchy, right? You have the government of Aragon and the government of the counties. As the Aragonese to expand further south and they liberated Valencia, Valencia almost became its own third government system. So you ended up, and the Balearic, right, including you could see for conquest, right? Those territories were controlled from Valencia, and so you ended up having three separate governments under one unified leadership. And those governments are represented by the symbol of Aragon. You can see on the right-hand side, you have the bars. On the lower left-hand side, you have the Moors that have been decapitated, representing these, and trees represent and the one represents violence. As opposed to being itself one unit country, it has several different countries. One nation, and actually on the right-hand side of the picture is the coat of arms of the Nice, left and the four more counties, and the of the around that chair. I've been in for 4,000 years. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I would have to guess it has something to do with when they were part of and that was funny. It comes from something having to do with that, but I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it has something with blood and gold, but who knows for sure. I'll try to look it up for you guys.
So, now, one of the interesting things is that it was part of the Crown of Aragon, but no, the coat of arms was the picture left-hand side, which represents all various regions of it. So now we move to the Kingdom of the Nasrid. After Castile had that expansion and Aragon just to incorporate all these different countries, not only has 20 games from the defeat of the TOLOSA. So it's very relative. And they do that making a clear alliance with Castile and combined with the long border of the Kingdom of the Sierra Nevada. And so it means the nation of around the inner cupola of Mara, which is Nasrid al-Sierra, which several of the Muslim marks of that 20. And I figured that Sergio might want to tell us a little bit about the architecture of Almora, which is one of Spain's masterpieces.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yes, absolutely. That is, probably one of the most iconic structures of not just Al-Andalus, but in Spain altogether. And the name Alhambra means the red one, because it does have a little bit of a red look to it. The bricks that they use have that.
Just for clarity, it's Alhamra in Arabic. Alhambra was a Spanish corruption of Alhambra.
Okay, which meant the red one, but a female one, like, right? A female version of that? Yeah, okay. And it was actually, before it was built in 889, it was a fortress, a Roman, actually it was a Roman building. Most likely it was a camp or a fort of some sort, but we're not really sure. And then it was a fortress in 889 during the first wave of the Umayyads. But then later it was abandoned. It wasn't much of a structure up until the 13th century when it was reconstructed for the Nasrid dynasty, and there it remained there for a long time. And if we could go to the next slide, we can see some of the artwork and architecture. So the whole Alhambra is just filled with all types of geometric shapes and arches, different styles of arches. We know that they have the horseshoe style and the multi-foil arch, which is like arches within arches. It's very fancy. It has a lot of detail to it and a lot of molds with inscriptions in it. And some of these molds have, religious quotes and stuff like that. To the right, we can see one and so forth. And there's also poetry. There's poetry throughout Alhambra that has stuff that talks about the mood of, for example, if it's the garden or if it's the court and stuff like that. There's one poem that might be referring to the actual Court of the Lions in Alhambra, which is a very famous wing of there, which is an outdoor area. And the poem goes something like this: "Melting silver flows through the pearls which it resembles. In its pure beauty, water and marble seem to be as one." It sounds like they're describing the lions that have water coming out of their mouth that's kind of like silver and stuff like that. That's what people believe. Now, there's also a common understanding that Islam forbids figurative art, meaning that they don't really accept pictures, or I should say faces of people and animals and stuff like that. However, there's a school of belief that might only be referring to religious things. Again, I'm not sure about that, but clearly there are animals here. And all throughout, there are Islamic art that does have people in it. It's just not religious stuff. So I think it's referring more to secular stuff. If it has Muhammad or if it has Allah, then yeah, they're definitely not incorporating faces and stuff like that. But this court, the Court of Lions in Alhambra, seems to be more secular. So that's why those lions are there. But again, that's just a belief. I'm not confirming that or denying that.
Sergio, just to give you a synopsis, there's actually an interesting in Samarkand, which was the capital where Timur Lenk ruled from. He at one point was defeated by Yazid III, and he was the Turkic Mongol member of Uzbekistan that conquered the world. He also depicted on his temple a lion's head, and he was also a big prominent of Muslim religion. So there used to be exceptions that were made based on depicting animals on the temples.
But Timur is a pretty strange case because he was well known for not being a terribly pious Muslim. The Nasrids at least claimed that they were pious Muslims. It just happens that they didn't observe the requirement not to draw animals' faces. They did observe, and they also didn't observe the requirement not to draw human faces, which you could have seen from the cupola that I showed you with the previous Muslim rulers.
Okay, great. So yeah, the Alhambra will obviously be the home for the Nazarid dynasty up until the Reconquista, which we'll cover, and when Isabella and then Fernie, that would actually be residents there. They would actually use that castle themselves, that fortress, when they were in Al-Andalus. And it was actually in that castle or that fortress where Columbus received his royal endorsement that he would be able to go into the New World, in the very place, the Alhambra. So that's my my story of the Alhambra.
Right. So just to finish it off, right? So we talked about how Granada was the last Islamic state in Europe. It was basically alone, but for 200 years or so, it was in relatively good terms with the rest of Spain. Now, there's a few reasons for this. We talked about the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Some of the other reasons include the fact that it was trading between the Islamic world in the south and with Italian merchants like from Genoa, and with other Spaniards to the north. So there's a lot of commerce moving between the two areas. There were also frequent raids from one side to the other and back, where neither side could pass an army through the mountains, but these raids were practically unstoppable. So you had these sort of back and forward. You also began to see, after most of Spain was united under Catholic monarchies, and this sort of war had been built up in the south, that there began to be a vision for convivence. So you started from the rest of Spain, a little here there. You also went to see purges in some cities. Purge did 31. So after these purges, many of the refugees from Granada, so the most densely populated areas, there were 1,100 of the city of Granada itself. I'll show you how big it was of people clear. There were periods when Castile and other Castile would be treated especially there between raids in Granada and Castile, there a trade by much stronger than that. And King too, until there were fought slowly began to lead to you see King or in Arabic Allah ibn Muhammad. So you see that's the Spanish is quite severe from Allah. So anyway, you can see on the right hand side you have Ferdinand Queen Isabel, and on the left hand side you have Black Horse, and you can see on the background. One of the things that inspired King Ferdinand to war against Granada was we need Catalonia in order to use and to cement the families. Now, this was exactly the way that Aragon had fed various territories. So you now had two different kingdoms under the main rule of family. Castile and Aragon were legal systems until the 1830s. You had two clear countries that came you see, first, in one of there, you can see on the map, in 1987, and then and that is the end of Islamic State.
Conquered the Jews and
were local citywide. So you have still Muslim population. Muslim population is coming to Granada type. The question about the influence of Ismaili is where each there either Sunni or is judges please up to the and just by leading first comes the emperor given at that time only king it was a very inward kingdom in terms of but and water building other about elevations she was definitely about very realist I think it's possible to separate those versions from the was first of all she really did quite one in terms of the 100 Years' War and federate the real threat and the real issue of Spain under monarchies. The leader by decides to on the battlefield. So she has to win credit that way.
No. I just want for questions. Anybody?
Because and then again here, in 1486, the Christian Spanish started to nibble away of
14. Sorry.
That's a good correction. So, what precipitated? I think you mentioned
the specifics. The Emirate of Granada and and so they reached it in 14.
And that's the city of Zahara.
But
okay, yeah. So it sounds like that it went out of control. The Muslim leaders thought they were strong, but it's out of control.
Numerous 200-year time span. Across the border, the other border towns. In fact, you were living it was a sort of territory and not clear who owned exactly when I say this location. Fine with the fact that Ferdinand was a ruler of his parents and wants to unify Spain. A very different outcome and at any other point in the yourself finishing loan.
The cost change and the same wise policies no longer fit.
I thought during the mention on that only in negotiations, but I back up. Then Sergio just said last time the world was studying medicines, but I don't think that they had anything to what we said was to.
Yeah, they had a lot of basic things, but those things were devastated.
Grenada was they're spread by ships to make the hard work.
I don't have statistics on it, so don't switch it up.
Sure. Carolingian, I go a little earlier time, had a big trade with Cordoba, so to say.
Sure.
Can you speak to what cases with West to speak, Carolingians and German kingdoms and emperors and all that stuff? How did what would they change in terms of stuff like that? What was in general?
Yeah, I have a better answer for you, but I don't know. It should be gold iron. The same thing, be gold iron and make gold iron. Sorry? Spices from
and the question is, so Granada as a last outpost of Islam. He also asked Byzantium or Constantinople of Mehmed the Second. So how has that paradigm worked? You have on one side, Muslim advancing in Europe, and on another side, they're losing, obviously. I mean, they're obviously not interconnected.
Sure, but you're not taking into account the schism. The fact that the Byzantines were losing was something that didn't terribly concern the Pope until it was very clear that the Muslims were going to make their way onto mainland Europe. There were Arab merchants in Constantinople, but the Arabs couldn't take the city militarily. They tried several times. The most famous one was in 661. They launched a naval invasion against the city of Constantinople. Sorry, somebody was asking about Arabs in Constantinople. They launched a naval invasion in 661 that was ultimately unsuccessful. And after that point, they sort of set the border with the Byzantine Empire in the middle of Cappadocia. So if there were Arabs there, they were there peaceably as merchants. It's also known that a lot of the Slavic trade routes, right, that the Arabs were using to recruit Slavs from the Kievan Rus went through Constantinople. But those were again, it was peaceful.
Yeah, can I add a little bit about Isabella being a military leader? It is my understanding that in that union between Castile and Aragon, Castile was a dominating power, and all of the decisions about starting the war was actually done solely by Isabella. Ferdinand could not be, didn't have a title of King of Castile. It was not allowed by the Council of Nobles. So he was in a diminutive, he had the diminutive power in that union, and it was mostly drive that Isabella had in the conquest. I mean, maybe he did the military work in the fields, but all the political powers was done by Isabella, and she's also formed unions to withstand the threat of France, unions with England by marrying daughters, union with England and union with Austria by marrying her daughter Juana.
Correct. Isabella was Queen of Castile, and because she was Queen of Castile and Ferdinand was King of Aragon, he had no hereditary right to her power. So when they married and they kept the two kingdoms separate, right, because it was a union of the monarchy, it wasn't a union of the governments, Isabella still had power over Castile, and so the councils responded to her because she was the legitimate heir to the throne.
Right, and it was a Castilian language that eventually became Spanish.
Yes. Aragonese, Catalan. Aragonese pretty much died out. Catalan became the dominant language of the Kingdom of Aragon. Catalan was used though in the Aragonese Empire, right, which was the territories on the Spanish mainland, as well as the Kingdom of Two Sicilies and Sardinia, Sardinia and Corsica, I think. No, just Sardinia. And so Aragonese was the administrative language in those territories until those became more Italian.
You meant, Richard, you were mentioning how the Spanish kingdom was unifying. There was something that popped up recently with the Catalonian independence movement, and that there was an argument on the Madrid side that said, no, you can't have independence because back in such and such dates, when you join the kingdom, something would happen. Do you know anything about that? Is that something you can speak to?
I don't know the specific argument you're referring to. But under the Articles of Union, when Petronia married Ramon Berenguer IV, the Catalan counties were a constituent part of the Kingdom of Aragon. There was no situation conceived of where those two would split. And the same in 1492 when, in 1480 when you had the union of the crowns in Spain between Castile and Aragon, there was no writing conceived of under which the two kingdoms would split in terms of in terms of the monarchy. So basically, the argument from the unionist side in Spain is on that particular issue is that Catalonia signed an Article of Union. They can't break the Article of Union. The general argument that unionists in Spain make is not that argument, though. The general argument that they make is that the economy is better with Catalonia in it, and that Catalonia has been part of Spain since there was a Spain to be in. And there are parts of Spain, for example, like Pamplona, which were not. That's not the case. Pamplona only became part of Spain in 1515.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody see my schedule?
It says you started screen sharing, but I don't see what you're sharing.
Exactly, same thing.
All right, stop sharing. I don't know what's going on. 1 second.
Hey, hey, Sergio, is that red wine you're drinking, by the way?